Yes, friends. As the video title suggests, you know what we are in for. Gather round, friends. Come to me, listen to some scary Krampus story. Though some religious people may object, what would Christmas be without that horned antithesis to Santa? I don't know. Don't ask me. Don't ask a vampire these deep, abiding questions. Yes, friends, regardless of where Krampus came from, or his origins, or the inner machinations of his maddened mind, I present to you these scary stories about the bastard. Or friend, depending on whether or not you have children, and whether or not you've been a good parent, and whether or not you do believe there is additional discipline owed your children, in spite of your own or in replacement of. That brings up the question, of course, is Krampus only for children? Or is he for adults? And if the second, is he for adults to discipline them, or to merely haunt their dreams in things like scary stories? Ponder these questions, my good friends, as I regale you with tonight's first story, My Grandfather's World War II Christmas Story by So Lonely 200. My grandfather, aged 98, served in the British military from 1940 to 1948. He has several medals in his time from service. It also goes without saying he has quite a few stories to tell. He has stories of being a POW to the Germans, storming forts, and, according to him, disemboweling a man with a garden trowel. Even in his old age, he still can recollect them clearly. His most interesting story, however, is from December of 1944. He had escaped a German POW camp where he was placed in while they prepared a transferal to a concentration camp. It was during his time on the run he came to a small German town. The people, who were no fans of Adolf, hid him from the Gestapo. However, there would be no need. The following is the story, as written in his journal.
I believe the date was December 5th or 6th. The people hid me from Hitler's men, but seemed fearful to walk the street on this night. The children were excited for the coming of St. Nicholas, I gathered. Hitler had tried to scrub away any religious influence on the holiday, but in small villages such as this, the people did not adhere to all the Führer's guidelines. I was hidden away with a family of 4, 2 children, a mother and her father. The father of the children was conscripted to Hitler's army, the Wehrmacht. The children were about 9 or 10, if I had to guess. I didn't see them that much, as I was beneath the floor, with a small window as my only company on that moonlit night as it shone through the glass. I heard the mother speak with who I can only presume was the SS looking for me. They barked something in German, and then the air went silent. I heard one of the lesser Nazis say, and this is a rough translation as I don't know much of the German, "Commander, we must be going." His voice seemed almost frightened. I heard sleigh bells at that moment, and noticed the Nazi voices get even more panicked in tone. The door shut then, and the children were placed in the cellar. I assumed that I was in the cellar, with me. I looked across the road, out of the only window in the place, and saw a silhouette in the night. The figure appeared to wear a cloak and a set of goat horns. This would be strange enough, but it was also on top of a home. I heard screaming from above me, the scream of the mother and the Nazis. There was a crash, and I felt a chill in the air. I silenced the children as best I could, who at this point were understandably frightened. There were gunshots, then more silence. I expected to hear the barking of the Gestapo, but instead I heard heavy steps, like hooves, but far too large. Chains seemed to be scraping the floor above the children and I. The door to the hidden area swung open at that moment. The son, I believe his name was Klaus, let out a shriek, and suddenly was snatched up, through the floorboards. Same with the little girl. I wasn't going to sit by and let this happen. I rose from my hiding place, shaken but undeterred. The bodies of the mother and the Gestapo and her father lay gutted and strewn about. The gore on the being's horns named it the culprit. It was putting the daughter in the large sack on its back, where I could see movement from what I could only assume was other children. It wore many furs and chains. It had a hunched disposition. I yelled at the cloaked figure. It turned, standing upright from its hunched position. It stood easily 9 or so feet tall. It had the body of a man, with large, sharp, knife-like fingers. The horns were a part of its person, growing from its goat-like head. It smiled at me with crooked, rotten teeth. Its eyes were also very much goat-like. Among its many chains were sleigh bells jingling as it moved, the source of the bells earlier. I moved to grab the pistol from the dead Gestapo's hand and fired it. The creature didn't move. It hardly seemed phased. It let out a cackle and left the home. Why had it not killed me? I ran after it and saw many other homes in the village were similarly ransacked. Bodies were strewn about, and their fireplaces were seemingly demolished. It threw its large bag onto the sleigh, pulled by 9 hellish goats. The sleigh itself was adorned with many furs and additional chains. Human faces in anguish were also visible, though I can't be sure if they were actual faces or merely representations. I heard the cries of the children, and it gave me one more grin. It said to me simply, "Fröhliche Krampusnacht." It whipped the goats, and they ran off into the night. That night I would hear many screams in the distance. I noticed the children remaining in the village 2 mornings later. The children remaining in the village 2 mornings later were greeted with a great deal of gifts. I left after 2 days and continued to Allied territories, ducking Gestapo at every turn.
Ever since I was a kid, he insisted that all his grandchildren and children stay at his home on December 5th. And he always made sure the fire burned hot. Well, friends, quite the story to kick things off, eh? I do love stories from England. Of course, I'm rather partial to that, being my country of origin. I mean, that story included 4 of the greatest things any story can contain. Britain, Christmas, the Nazis, and a monster. As I say, 4 of the easiest things to make your story great. Or get on the nerves of certain political establishments nowadays, I say. Good story nonetheless, though, eh? Especially as we make our march to Christmas, or if you are listening on this darksome Christmas night. I do recommend that you listen to Krampus stories on Christmas Eve, not just December 5th, but Christmas Eve. It's always too much Santa Claus if you ask me. But we've just begun with this first story, so let us on to our second of the night. Up next is Jake Wick's memorable tale, A Krampus Carol. If there was anyone to be found on Santa's naughty list, it was surely Cindy's older sister, Maddie. Cindy was 8, and Maddie was 3 years more, and had never said a nice thing to Cindy in her life. Or so it seemed. Cindy's my favorite, Cindy's so pretty, Cindy's this, Cindy's that. These were the words from Maddie's mother that rang in Maddie's head through every day of the year, but especially around Christmas time, when Cindy was talking sweetly of gift-giving and decorating and loving her family and friends. Cindy was sweet, but it was authentic. All she really wanted was to be loved by Maddie, the same way she herself loved Maddie. Since Cindy was a baby, Maddie hadn't liked her. Some of Cindy's earliest memories revolved around the constant sideways looks she would receive from Maddie. The passive aggression, the endless competitions for Mom's affection. Cindy was always the one to receive it, but on certain days, she would ask her mother to pay Maddie some attention too. "Oh, your sister's fine," her mother would say. "Your sister gets plenty of attention." And after saying this, her mother would usually give Maddie a half-hearted pat on the head and then go right back to giving Cindy all the affection a child would ever need. It left a hollow place in Cindy, and when she tried to give Maddie the love she so desperately needed, Maddie would shun Cindy as if Cindy were a leper. Now this year, Maddie had been extra bitter. Perhaps it was the additional attention Cindy garnered for her performance in the school's Christmas play, or maybe it was the way Mom constantly bragged about Cindy's acting. "She's the next Meryl Streep, I'm telling you," Cindy's mother would brag. But whatever the reason, Maddie took every chance she saw to torment her younger sister. Cindy woke up one morning with gum in her hair. Another day, she found that her underwear was soaked in honey. Her favorite dolls would go missing. The TV in her room, which Maddie wasn't allowed to have, was constantly unplugged. Yet Cindy's desire for her sister's acceptance continued through the month of December. She continued to be kind. She persisted in giving Maddie compliments even when her mother did not. The gift at the top of Maddie's Christmas list was a brand new makeup kit. Cindy made sure that she would be the one to give it to her Christmas morning. Despite all this, Cindy had felt a wear and tear from all Maddie's torments throughout the month, and it all came to a breaking point on Christmas Eve. The family sat at the Christmas Eve dinner table and ate ham and mashed potatoes and Christmas cookies. Cindy's mother had been bragging shamelessly all night long about Cindy's acting. There had been no mention of Maddie, not at any point. Maddie was stewing, and Cindy could see it. At one point, through all the bragging and praising and gloating, Maggie finally chimed in. "I don't think Cindy's acting is that good," she said matter-of-factly. It was as though a bomb had gone off in the room. Everyone looked at Maddie like they were unsure they'd heard correctly. It was like blasphemy. "What kind of thing is that to say?" asked Mother. Maddie shrugged. "I don't know," Maddie said. "I just think you're exaggerating a bit. I mean, she's decent." All of the memories of Maddie's torments began to broil and fester in Cindy's mind, and now here was Maddie disparaging Cindy at the dinner table, in front of the entire family, in front of all the aunts and uncles and cousins and friends. "At least I'm good at something," Cindy blurted. And just like that, Maddie retracted into a pit of shame, Cindy's words ringing true and humiliating. Mother only added fuel to the fire by shrugging at Maddie in a matter-of-fact manner. "Your sister's got a point," said Mother. Cindy felt horrible as she watched Maddie sulk and trudge off toward the bathroom like a beaten dog. Cindy hated the power she held in her hands. That night, everyone hunkered down in their beds and waited for Santa to leave his gifts below the tree. But Cindy had trouble sleeping. It was midnight now. Cindy rarely found herself awake at this hour, but she knew why. Cindy removed her covers and hopped out of bed and tiptoed across the room. She was careful not to wake anyone. She opened her closet door and grabbed Maddie's wrapped gift. She tiptoed down the dark hallway and dragged her fingers along the wall so as not to stumble around in the dark. "I'll give Maddie her gift and tell her I'm sorry and tell her I love her," Cindy thought to herself. That's what I'll do. And she'll be happy, and she'll forgive me, and maybe she'll even say she loves me too." When Cindy arrived outside Maddie's door, she heard strange shuffling noises coming from inside. Perhaps Maddie was preparing another prank for Cindy. No matter. Cindy was going to walk in and give Maddie her present and try and make amends. Cindy opened the door just a crack. She was careful not to startle Maddie. It was so dark inside the room that she couldn't see a thing, but she could hear a great deal of shuffling inside the room as before. Cindy stared into the room for quite some time, patiently waiting for her eyes to adjust to the gloom. When her eyes adjusted, she saw an empty bed. She saw Maddie's wide-open window. She saw a 7-foot figure standing in the shadows. She saw the rounded cage upon its back, and then she saw Maddie sitting in the cage like a frightened bird. As Cindy's terrified eyes further adjusted to the dark, she saw the figure more clearly. It had a goat's head with large horns on top. Its eyes were red and impish and hostile. It wore a suit much like Santa Claus, and even jingling sleigh bells hung from a few ends of the garment. Cindy stood frozen with fear as the creature glanced at her and gave her a nod and a wink. The creature made its way toward the window. As it did, the last Cindy saw of her sister was a look of fear and sadness and regret. And then the creature left as Cindy stood there with the present in her hands. Down the chimney he will come with his great big grin, and you'll find that even the kiddies are very liable to sin. What will Krampus say when he finds everybody sinning? What will Krampus say when he hears them sin, sin, sinning? I think it is safe to say, friends, that of all Krampus's evils, he does have a penchant for taking children. Perhaps Krampus is not alive, but the ghost of someone, something, or perhaps somebody. Perhaps he is the ghost of a certain Jeffrey. I shan't say the name, but I do believe, friends, on a serious note, that there are real living Krampuses in this life. In fact, I'll hazard a guess that Krampus is rather the fanciful imagining of someone who saw real-life Krampuses and gave them a more fanciful cast in a story. Whatever you believe, let us on to our next Krampus story. Up next, friends, is a chilling account of Krampus's other powers, not only those to steal naughty children. Here is one by Phil Owen, titled, "It Might Just Be the Devil Coming to Get Even." We have a saying here in the Austrian mountains, "Wann's wirklich hin is, krampt's nimmer ham, tuat's doch, holt der Teufel sein Schulden," which roughly translated means, if something is dead, it will never come home again. If it does, it might just be the devil coming to get even. My grandpa always closed his World War II stories with this little poem. As a child, I didn't think of it much, as I was more into the whole war aspect of his tales. He was a tank commander in the German army before the Nazis took over. I was always afraid that my grandpa was a Nazi, but he assured me that as soon as he had the chance, he ran off and left the Wehrmacht. When the war started, he got assigned to a little post in the mountain region of Slovenia on the Austrian border side. His tank and 3 others should watch and protect the outpost against Slovenian freedom fighters. Grandpa tried to befriend the resistance, however, so they could get him out of the Nazi army. Months went by. The deepest and coldest winter came up, and Grandpa soon learned about the Austrian mythology of Krampus. I'm almost certain some of you have heard of that, mostly because of the movie or the interview with the Austrian actor Christoph Waltz. So I'm not going to get all too deep into this lore. Just imagine a bunch of German soldiers somewhere far from home on some dark and lost mountain, unable to go back home and unable to push forward, as they have the enemy on both sides, freezing through the coldest of nights just to witness a Krampus walk. Around 50 to 60 villagers, all dressed as the devil himself, walking through the deep woods with a bunch of torches. No talking, no yelling, just the noise of hundreds of chains which they wore around their necks. Grandpa always changed when he talked about the Krampus walk and how his men felt at this moment. Heavily armed soldiers sitting on some of the most massive tanks at the time, and they were all scared to their bones. One night, around that time, the Krampuslauf came to a halt. They surrounded the soldiers' camp while almost everyone was asleep, except for my grandpa. He took the chance, stepped in front of them, threw away his weapon, and tried to talk to them. To be honest, I was too young to remember what happened and how they finally ended up helping him get down from this god-forsaken mountain and out of the Nazi army. But it was a few months later that he met my grandma, so surviving all of this brought him closer to heaven and redemption. All of this is also not the point of why I'm writing this subreddit. The point is, I'm not sure if he found heaven or redemption, because I'm afraid my grandpa did a pact with the devil. 2 weeks ago, he passed away, so I got to pick up some of his stuff and clean up the house. Grandpa lived a quiet life after my grandma died years before him, so all that was left was his bed, his books, and of course his rocking chair, in which he used to sit and tell me his war stories. I thought about keeping the rocking chair and had dreamed about telling my grandkids my own stories one day in it. But after what I had witnessed just about 10 minutes ago, I am honestly willing to set it and the house on fire.
If something is dead, it will never come home again. If it does, it might just be the devil coming to get even.
These words, spoken by the rusty voice of my grandpa, flew through my head as I opened the living room door and saw the rocking chair slowly rocking back and forth. Moaning and screeching with every little move, the voice in my head got louder and louder, almost screaming at me. It might just be the devil. Had my grandpa done a deal with the devil to get off the mountain? Was all of this true? Has any one of you guys heard about something like this before? What am I supposed to do? As I am writing this, the chair kept rocking, and the voice in my head won't stop. I need help, please. And on that note, friends, before you need help like the person in our final story, I think it is time we end tonight these tales of Krampus and terrifying Christmas. I hope you are looking forward to my next video, friends, and I hope you do consider, if you enjoyed these stories and if you have the means, to support me on Patreon. I am trying devilishly as I can to give ad-free videos, or at least videos with the ads reduced, so that the videos and stories aren't interrupted with them. A note quickly about that. YouTube gives me the feature to set the ads where I will in the video. Of course, naturally, I want to be conscientious, and I set the ads to play in between stories. That is to say, when one story ends and one story begins. Unfortunately, despite this, YouTube often lets the ads play 10 or 20 seconds before the video, and you can imagine that it is devilishly hard to predict the ad placement 10 to 20 seconds later in the video so that it plays at just the right time. Either way, it is very frustrating, friends, not just for you, but for me as well. I know some of you have expressed your frustrations, and it may seem like I am doing nothing, but please, friends, those of you who know me know that I am a very conscientious person, and I would not just let ads disrupt stories in my videos. However, as hard as I try, the best way to help me is to support me on Patreon. I have a number of tiers to accommodate all financial levels, and I'm hoping that one day I do get enough patrons so that I won't have to run ads at all on YouTube. But anyways, friends, I hope you enjoyed these stories and look forward to the next video. As I say, I just hope Krampus doesn't come visit us on December 5th, or each day in December after.